to the garment manufacturer and to the final product. The GRS applies to any product with a minimum of 20% of recycled content. However, if you want to make any product-specific claims, your product will have to have a minimum of 50% of recycled content. And for the RCS, you can use the RCS if you have a minimum percentage content between 5% and 95%. And then there are two options, whether you use it as is, as the full RCS claim, or as a blended claim. Another point to call out, I had alluded to it, is that the GRS includes social and environmental requirements and also restricts the use of hazardous chemicals in GRS products. I posted here the different documents that we have available for the GRS. So the RCS is in the 2.0 version, GRS in the 4.0 version, and then we have an implementation manual for each. We also have a logo use and claims guide that is combined for both of them right now. And then there is also the content claim standard that is the backbone of our existing standard that regulates the chain of custody. We are currently working on a recycled materials resource document that we will also make available on our website as soon as it becomes available. Now let's look at some claims and labeling and other certification questions. So Textile Exchange allows two types of claims. The first one is a general marketing claim, and the second one is a product-specific claim. And the general marketing claim is really more broad and high level in nature and usually communicates a commitment. So examples could be, we are committed to sourcing only GRS certified material by 2025, or the responsible down standard addresses the welfare of sheep and the land they graze on. So more high level, not product specific. But then we also have product-specific claims, and those are tied to a product. They can be online or in paper. So to the left here, you see an example of a GRS mention on a website for a pair of sneakers, and then our logo use on different hang tags. So this is a question that we often receive. So what do I actually have to do if I want to label? And as a general rule of thumb, Textile Exchange requires all sites to be certified through to the seller in the last business-to-business transaction. And usually that is the garment manufacturer or the brand, whereas there are some nuances for whether or not a brand needs to get certified, but the rule really is the seller in the final business-to-business transaction. Consumers and retailers are out of scope of certification and do not need to be certified. And in terms of what somebody has to do, a certified entity, if they want to be labeled, there are three main things. The first is to have proof of a certified supply chain up to the final business-to-business transaction. Then to also, secondly, comply with our logo use and claims guide, and also have the artwork and the claim approved by our CB. And at that, I'm handing it over to my colleague, Ashley.
Thanks, Trini. So there's a couple more questions that are that we get asked regularly with the GRS and RCS. The one question is, can components be labeled under the GRS? And it can be sometimes tricky to figure out the answer to this question, but we do allow components of a product to be labeled. We recommend that you only do this in cases where the component is easily understood by the consumer. So referring to something like the shell of the jacket or the fill of the product, rather than a more technical component like weft yarn or something like that. And just to clarify that this allowance for components to be labeled does not mean that if only the fabric is certified and not the garment, that the fabric can still be called GRS. we still require the full supply chain of the final product to be certified, as Trini said, up to the seller in the last business-to-business transaction. What we are intending with the component labeling is that if you have something, maybe that component is 100% recycled content, or the material is all within that component, it might be easier for the consumer to understand rather than what the overall weight is maybe of the recycled content. On that next point, it goes into more along those same lines, that the percentages can be calculated either by volume or weight, and that trims and accessories are excluded, obviously, unless it's the trim or accessory that includes the recycled content. You can go to the next question. This is also, I would say, probably all of the questions that almost all the questions we get around the RCS and GRS is, does this material actually qualify as recycled? And there are two, if you look at the document, there are two definitions that are most important in answering this question. The first is the definition of reclaimed material, and it's material that would have otherwise been disposed of as waste or used as energy recovery, but that it has been diverted or collected for a recycling process. So this is when things have been diverted from waste, been diverted away from landfill or energy recovery, but they haven't yet been recycled. So we refer to this material as reclaimed material. The second definition that's important for understanding whether a material qualifies is the definition of recycled material. And in the definition, you'll read that it means reprocessed from reclaimed material and reprocessed within a different manufacturing process than the one that generated it. So if there is a waste that's generated through spinning and that material can go back into spinning, then it doesn't qualify. So first, the material needs to be qualified as reclaimed, and then it needs to be qualified as recycled. We can go to the next slide. There are a lot of instances, I should say there are some instances where a material doesn't actually qualify for that definition of our recycled claim standard or global recycled standard. And I thought it would be interesting or maybe helpful to provide a little bit of a recommendation from Textile Exchange about how to handle that when a material doesn't qualify. So obviously, if you're sitting in the brand retailer position, it's really important to understand the nuances between these materials and to make good decisions about what you want to include within your product, within your portfolio. But our intention is really not that we would limit these other types of use of the material. So if maybe you collected something that isn't normally considered to be waste, it has a kind of a typical use, and you're collecting that material and reusing it in that way, that is a great thing. We actually know with the waste hierarchy that the progression should be to reduce the amount of waste that we produce, to reuse as much of it as possible in its current form, and then if that's not possible, to recycle. And so the protection around the term of recycling is not necessarily intended to provide incentive to skip reducing waste and reusing waste, but just to make sure that we're being really specific when we talk about recycled content. So if you have opportunities or you have chances to use material, even though it doesn't qualify as recycled, we definitely encourage that and recommend that. Ultimately, we want materials to stay used, to stay within the system for as long as possible, and to always be able to find a use. And that may be to reuse it or to to create more efficiency even before you get to the step of recycling. Next slide. So with that, I am very happy to introduce Beth Greenaway from Zalando. And we thought it would be great to have somebody from a company come in and speak to us and share their experience with the group here today, mostly because one of the trends, I'm going to go in a little bit into some of the trends that we've seen in terms of adoption of the standards. And one of the things that we've seen quite a bit is an increase in demand, in questions, in use of certification by retailers that are acting in their capacity as a retailer and not as a brand. So we were interested, Beth, in your perspective on this. We would love to hear a little bit more about Zalando's approach to sustainability and how certifications fit into that work.
Yeah, great, of course. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here and to speak to everyone. And it's also wonderful to hear that we're helping kind of drive some of that positive impact that we really want to see. So yeah, really happy to talk through that. I have a couple of slides, but I think then we can get into a chat as well. I think what we're really aiming to do, and if we go to the next slide, is really we think it's time to do more and kind of go beyond the basics of what has been done before in terms of corporate social responsibility, and really kind of stepping up now to face the challenges that we see in the world and the kind of, you know, company and business that we want to be. So for us, this was a process of a few months last year, and then in October we launched our new Do More strategy, which covers 6 areas. If we go to the next slide, you'll see them there. And I think this is really about, for us, you know, setting the foundation, as we said at the top, to become a sustainable fashion platform. And we really want to have, in the future, be able to have a net positive impact for people and planet. So some of this relates around, you know, taking a stand and really saying, what are our minimum standards? What do we accept? What's the type of business that we want to be in? Who are the partners that we want to work with? The first target is around carbon neutrality and carbon emissions. So we've been carbon neutral since last year. And then this year in the summer, we also set our science-based targets, which is going to really drive quite significant reductions in our scope 1, 2, and 3. And there's some link there as well with kind of the use of recycled materials and opportunities we see. We also definitely see a massive opportunity in packaging. And I think this is something where there's a lot of innovation going on in the industry, also in terms of recycled content. And we really aim to minimize waste and keep materials in use. So really this shift towards a more circular system, and also eliminate single-use plastics. Then we have a target around continuously increasing our ethical standards. So this, as I was saying before, is really about who are the partners that we want to work with and what's the type of business that we want to be. And I think this, as a kind of a minimum standard, is really also where we're trying to drive towards certification at a kind of baseline level and help the industry progress. And this contributes really significantly as well to our 4th target, which is about generating 20% of our sales or our gross merchandise volume with more sustainable products. So we highlight more sustainable products on site that fulfill one of our different sustainability criteria, and recycled content is one of those. So we're really aiming to drive the uptake there. And then we're also looking towards the future. So I kind of touched on that with packaging before, but we're really looking to apply the principles of circularity and extend the life of at least 50 million fashion products. So in the last 2 weeks, we just launched our pre-owned category. So this is about re-commerce of existing pre-loved products on our web shop. So that's a really exciting step. And then we're also looking at how we can kind of adapt for the future and provide skilling opportunities for the workforce. So that is kind of everything in together. And I think the really exciting target, or the one that's we get the most questions about, is really this middle one. So style with care, the 20%, that's what a lot of our buyers and what our commercial teams are really driving for. And I think to Ashley, your point earlier, this is where we're having a lot of conversations with the brands that we sell. We're a European business. For those of you that don't know, we're one of the biggest online fashion retailers in Europe, and we work with about 2,500 brands. So this is a really, really big target for us, and one that we're working hard to achieve. And the recycled standards really play a big part in that.
That's great. I'm curious about you mentioned before the scope that you have targets across scope 1, 2, and 3. And I guess these standards are all well within your scope 3. Do you have any specific climate targets you can share within scope 3?
Yes,
Or
we
is
do.
that-
So related to the first goal that I talked about, we, as part of our science-based targets, we've committed to a 1.5 degree pathway of warming.
Okay.
And that basically means that within our scope 3, that's also not just our own operations, but also obviously all of the products that we sell from our 2,500 brand partners. So that's a massive scope 3. Yes, and we've committed that we're going to reduce that by 40%. And that actually means some of that's going to come from our private labels. We have 5 private labels as well. So we manufacture our own products, and we obviously also sell products from other brands. And in terms of our partners, that means looking at our brands, looking also at our delivery partners, and other obviously partners that we work with logistics. And we're actually aiming to engage 90% by volume of our suppliers also in setting their own SBTs. So it's kind of a double-pronged approach of firstly just engaging the people and the partners that we work with, and getting them to set their own, but also looking very much at our own business and our own manufacturing and supply chain, and really trying to drive some change there.
Yeah, wow, on such a massive scale. That's really interesting. Sorry, keep going.
No, that was it. And I think just because we've got this slide up, this is just for maybe the people watching to see. This is how we define currently what makes a more sustainable product. Understanding obviously that there's no kind of 100% black or white in there. We're all on a journey and we're trying to do better. And the diagram at the top right is just trying to show that, you know, there's technological challenges with a lot of this. I think we see, you know, with a lot of fibers like cotton or wool, it's really hard to be getting past the kind of 20-30% mark at the moment. But obviously there's a lot more options within that in terms of synthetics and where you can increase. And so we're really looking to drive also the uptake of the content in specific products, not just having the certification.
And when Zalando decided to pull in certifications as part of this strategy, would you say that was kind of something that was internally led? Did consumer demand have something to do with that? You know, where did I guess the drive to use that third-party level of certification come in?
I think it was a mix of all of that. It definitely was internally driven at the start. So we started this work in 2016, so a few years ago now, and there wasn't actually that much at the time that was available on the market that could really be trusted. And I think as a retailer, we're kind of so far removed from, you know, the brands and their supply chains that I think third-party certification just gives really an extra level of credibility. Especially, I think, as a European retailer, we have more than 50% of our sales that come from the German, Austrian, Switzerland region. And that's just a very there's a lot of kind of cultural focus towards standards and certifications and a kind of stamp that this product, you know, is good and that it's been checked by a third party. So I think also from a customer perspective, yes, standards are super important. I do think there's an element of like a certification jungle some of the time, and I think working in this, it can get super complex and really difficult to understand all the different levels. And I think that's also why, just to maybe explain why we don't always have third-party standards as the last stage visible to the customer, is just because, as you explained in the presentation, the brand has to be certified for us to show that. And so it really does limit kind of the claims that you can make, or, you know, if you want to be driving that change and encouraging brands, it's often really difficult even to get that happening in the supply chain. So we want to offer different kind of levels of options, and then the aim would be over time to get brand certified. We've just ourselves just gone through the process of certification to a number of the Textile Exchange standards. So it's definitely something that we know is difficult and takes time and money, but I think it's hopefully we can simplify that in future. And I think, yeah, working with the Textile Exchange team as well, just to make that as kind of streamlined as possible in the future.
Yeah, you guys have been really helpful in giving us a lot of feedback on those kinds of challenges, and we're working on actually a revision of the content claim standard that's taking in that feedback as well as other feedback. And so we'll be hopefully announcing some updates to that model soon. I don't think I have any more questions for you, Beth, at this time, but I do want to just tell all of our attendees to feel free to start asking questions. We'll take the questions at the end, but feel free to, inject any questions for us as well as for Beth, and we'll take those questions at the end. Beth, thank you so much for sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Keep going.
Well, there was just a quick one at the end, just to say that I think, we're continuing to drive this work, and we're super happy to see that the uptake of certification is there. We're really, I guess, as a business, trying to make that checking process more robust. So that's what will be coming in the next few months. Is just really making sure that we're doing as much checking and verification as we can. I think digitization plays a big role in that, and I know that you guys are also planning some databases and different things, so looking forward to that. And I think, as I said, just making sure that we're raising standards towards our 2023 goals. So there will be more that's coming, and I think, we're looking to drive that uptake and the certification. And then really for us, it's also about bringing all of this together and creating one standard. So we're super excited to be to see, you guys starting to also work with the SAC and the Higg Index, and just bringing all of that together. And for us, the ultimate goal would be to get to a point where we can communicate sustainability performance in one way to customers, and for everybody to be doing that in the same way, and it's trusted data that's comparable. So we're also trialing some things with the Higg this year and next year, and hope to see just more alignment across the industry when it comes to things like that. So that's it.
Yeah, the other question that came to my mind was that if you had a magic wand, what you would do to make the standards, more in line or deliver more to your targets. But it looks like you already made your 3 wishes. Great. Well, thank you so much, Beth. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, on that note of looking ahead to the future, we wanted to give you just kind of a glance of where standards are right now with Textile Exchange, and where Beth mentioned actually a lot of really good work around climate, and we will be kind of announcing more work in that area soon. But we wanted to give you an idea of just the level of growth that we've seen in standards. And just remember that this is calculated by site count. So this growth could be across any number of, any part of the supply chain, but this is the number of facilities that have this certification. And GRS has overtaken, the organic content standard was previously our highest count standard that we had, and the global recycled standard has passed that in 2019. So really seeing a huge level of demand and a huge level of growth in the global recycled standard. And specifically, both, you can kind of see those numbers over the last 5 years, both between the GRS and the RCS. And I think this trend of seeing more demand for certification at the retail level and at the brand level, we're seeing a lot more. It's a lot more common for the certification to be going all the way through the supply chain, where I think it was common previously for that certification to stop at yarn or fabric, but we're starting to see more of that grow through garment manufacturing and brand certification as well. I wanted to also take the chance to give you an update around Textile Exchange's climate strategy. And the reason that this is important is that we want to really, this is a lens that we'll be looking at our standards through. And Textile Exchange has set out the strategic intent to drive and guide the textile industry to reduce greenhouse gas emissions anywhere from 35 to 45% by 2030, specifically looking at that pre-spinning phase of fiber materials production. And this is really coming from the report that was released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change organized by the UN. And we've seen a lot of brands and retailers, Zalando is a great example, making commitments, specific commitments in line with these science-based targets. And Textile Exchange is looking to, in the next 10 years, to really drive acceleration in this space and to drive the kind of changes that we need to see in order to get to those that level of reduction, which is a pretty, it's a pretty ambitious target, and we're really excited about that. And we know that recycled material is going to play a really big role in that, both due to the greenhouse gas emission reduction there is in switching from virgin to recycled, and also in the opportunities around creating more efficiency in the supply chain, keeping materials in use for longer, is also really strategic in reducing these emissions. Go to the next slide. So in our upcoming RCS and GRS revision, we will be taking we'll have an open feedback period on the current version of the standard. We'll work on a draft with the International Working Group, take that through public consultation, and then release the standard as is our kind of normal rhythm. Some of the things that we're looking at in terms of the topics that we want to look at are adding that climate lens. So, today the standard is very focused on just that definition of recycled and making sure that that the material qualifies. But we want to potentially look at what it might look like to add a climate lens to think about how different feedstocks and different types of recycling have different trade-offs, different levels of reduction of some of these impact areas, and how that might factor in to certification. Specifically identifying, if you want to stay on that slide, specifically identifying feedstocks. So if we know that one type of feedstock has a lower impact, then maybe we should be able to identify that one and carry it forward. We've also seen a really high demand for identifying things like ocean plastic or ocean-bound plastic, and we're looking at potentially incorporating a definition there, as well as some additional specificity around chemical recycling and the chain of custody for that model. And in the standards timeline, and Trini, I don't know if you want to jump in on this one, or I can keep going.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we're always, as the owners of 6 standards, Textile Exchange is always at some stage in a revision. Earlier in 2020, we finished the revision of the organic content standard, the responsible wool standard, and released the new responsible mohair standard. And we're currently working on developing the responsible alpaca standard through a group that's part of the responsible wool standard international working group. We're updating our claims policy that will replace all of the logo use and claims guides for our standards. We're moving to just having one claims policy. And we are also updating the content claims standard. So we mentioned earlier that that standard is also in the middle of being revised. And we will work internally on getting ready for the revision of the RCS and GRS, and then we'll work on that revision in early 2021 with the International Working Group. So always something going on with Textile Exchange standards. And the content claim standard revision that Trini is leading is happening right now. We have started off with that initial feedback with the internal research and drafting of the issue papers. And now we are working with the International Working Group, holding meetings, and we expect the draft to be finished in early 2021 and then released for public consultation and finalization sometime around Q2 of 2021. And that will, the content claim standard, because as Trini mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, it's really the foundation for all of Textile Exchange standards. And so once that's released, all of the changes will affect all of our standards. And we'll allow a transition period, of course, as we normally do, but definitely be watching watching for that. I think we can provide the link for the content claim standard revision website so folks can stay in the loop on that. I mentioned before the standards claim policy is coming. It will replace the RCS and GRS logo use and claims guide. It will have guidance specific to all of the standards, some clarity around who needs to be certified and what process, what steps they need to take. And once this claims policy is finalized, we're also looking into sharing specific guidance documents. So this claims policy applies to everyone, but we are looking to provide guidance documents that might be specific for brands or specific for retailers and suppliers. So definitely be watching for those new documents coming soon. And finally, Trini has shared some resources. Trini, I'll let you go through those if you like.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So this slide is hyperlinked. We will be sharing the slides at the end. So this is really intended to help you find the most important documents quickly. So on this slide, you will find the standard documents themselves, the implementation manuals, the current GRS RCS logo use and claims guide, as well as the certification procedures. And then some of you may have been on another recent webinar that we had around the supplier and brand and retailer certification. We recently developed 2 toolkits to that extent, and I highly encourage to take a look at those. They are quite useful. Then there are also some documents we have around how to get certified, a link to our list of certified companies where you can either search by standard, by country, by CV. So there are different key indicators you can type in, but it's basically a list or a database that you can search. And then we also have a recorded training on brand certification under the current version of the Content Claim Standard 2.0. And all of this information is on our website as well, but I wanted to pull these out specifically. And generally speaking, Ashley talked about the upcoming GRS RCS revision. And to that extent, we will be forming an international working group. If you are interested in joining this international working group, once we'll pull it together, please send an email to standards@textileexchange.org. And that is also the email that you can use for any kind of questions you have around our recycled standards or standards in general. And next, I wanted to talk more about the Download Center, which is a feature that I'm very excited about. We recently redesigned our website, our Integrity website. And this is a screenshot of the Download Center, which provides numerous documents on all our existing standards. And you can see to the right here that you can filter by category, by type, by different languages. We don't have all the standards in different languages, but some we do. So this is really a good resource to go to if you are looking for a document. And at that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kelly, to see which kind of questions we have, and also encourage our listeners to ask their questions and type them into the Q&A box.
Great, thanks, Trini. So right now we just have one question, and it's talking a little bit about chain of custody and whether it's possible to mix RCS certification with GRS to have a complete chain of custody. So the question is an RCS certification possible if the processing stage before the manufacturer is GRS certified, or do we need the same standard, or in our terms, the same scope certificate to have a full chain of custody?
Yeah, I can take that one. So if you go back to, Trini, do you want to go back to the chain of custody slide that you had? And hopefully people take this opportunity to ask more questions. Yes, perfect. So in this example, with the RCS and GRS, in this example, we've started it from a farm, but this for the RCS and GRS, obviously it would start at the recycler. But if you imagine that you had yarn that was coming from the yarn mill was certified to the GRS, and then the fabric mill was certified to the RCS. The RCS standard accepts both the RCS and the GRS. So that transaction certificate from the yarn mill could be issued from the global recycled standard, and that would be perfectly acceptable. The RCS, because it is just the chain of custody, it can accept material whether it was certified to RCS or GRS. It does not work the other way because the GRS is a more strict standard, and it also includes the social, environmental, and chemical requirements. Then if that yarn was certified to the RCS and the fabric was certified to the GRS, then that RCS would not be accepted. The yarn mill would need to add in the GRS to their scope, which usually isn't too challenging. If you have one standard, it's not too challenging to add the other recycled standard to your existing scope with your certification body.
Thank you, Ashley. I don't see any other questions right now in the Q&A box. And just a reminder, there's a banner down at the bottom of the webinar that says Q&A. If you do have questions, you can type them in there. I'm trying to think of some other common questions that we get in the inbox, and I know we touched on it briefly, but maybe Trini, if you just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about going back to the claims and labeling, the difference between the 50% in order to label versus the 20% in order to be certified. I know that's something that we get asked a lot, and it might be beneficial to just go over it.
Sure. So for a product-specific claim to be made for the GRS, we require a higher percentage on the product so that you can use the global recycled standard. But just to use it as a business-to-business tool, you will need a minimum of 20% of recycled content. And then in terms of the differences of when GRS, when RCS, one to keep in mind is so that for the RCS, you don't have any processing criteria included, and you either have the option to have a 100% claim with the RCS 100 claim, or you can also label blended products. Because the designation is much bigger between the percentages, ranges from 5 to 95%. Compared to the GRS, what I just mentioned, you need a minimum of 50% of recycled content, and you also have processing criteria included.
Thanks. Just thought that would be helpful to reiterate. I don't see any other questions coming in through the Q&A, but again, we're going to be sending this presentation out. I think tomorrow is when the recording and the slides go out with all of the links to the resources. So if any questions come up while everyone's reviewing that content, feel free to email standards@textileexchange.org, and Trini or I will be able to get back to you from there. I think with that, we can head over to the last slide, unless Ashley or Trini, you guys have anything else to add to the presentation?
Nope. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Is that your closing, Ashley?
Yep.
Okay,
We're ready
great.
for you to close us out, Rose. Thanks.
So awesome. I just want to say thank you to you speakers, and thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, as Callie mentioned, that there will be a post-webinar email that will be sent out to all registered participants with the links to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.